LGBTQ plus rights have come a long way since that first brick was thrown at Stonewall back in New York City in June of 1969. For more than a decade, corporate America has played a role in the progress of LGBTQ plus rights by making public gestures and participating in things like Pride Month. Despite signs of progress, there is still a lot of work to be done. It was only the summer of 2020 that the U.S. Supreme Court made discrimination against workers based on their gender identity or sexual orientation illegal. 2020 was the most violent year for transgender people in America, with 350 murdered. 22% of them were in their own home. The queer community in America faces discrimination every day, and politicians are still denying them of their rights, such as going to the bathroom in a public place, adopting and fostering children, and gaining access to basic health and welfare programs. So even though diversity and inclusion may have climbed the corporate ladder, Glassdoor reported that 50% of people fear that being out would hurt their career prospects, and 50% of queer workers said that they had experienced or witnessed negative comments from coworkers. And even though the Biden-Harris administration might be the most pro-LGBTQ plus rights administration America has ever had, there are still fights to be fought for full equality. Creating real systemic change is a continuous journey that requires us to always keep taking steps forward, no matter how big or how small. This is the work in progress. I caught up with Reddit COO Jen Wong and former Goldman Sachs executive and current partner at Sixth Street, Marty Chavez, to hear their personal stories and their experiences and thoughts on the future of LGBTQ plus inclusion in the workplace. Jen Wong, welcome to The Work in Progress. How are you?
Thanks, I'm doing well. Hi, how are you, Chris?
I'm great. Probably not as busy as you. I guess in context of The Work in Progress, you check a lot of boxes. Asian, woman, LGBTQ, like the whole nine, and you have to represent a lot of different groups. What is that experience like to do the work and also represent a lot of different groups while you're doing the work?
Well, it's a good question because, I think that early on in my career, it just meant that I felt different in every way. Over time, I think it just has become feeling like I'm unique and have a different perspective. And I'm actually really happy about that. And sometimes I like to say, hey, this might be a really different vantage point, but I'm just going to give it to you. And so I viewed it as an asset. And then that's one of the best things that's happened is changing from feeling like it was just a source of difference and maybe being intimidated to having it be a marker of who I am.
As a COO, you also have to understand a lot of different vantage points. I'm going to read from your LinkedIn. Revenue, operations, consumer and product marketing, finance, talent, and growth. That's a lot. When you talk about leading people and leading different organizations, how does your diversity lens play a role in how you operate on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, when you're an operator, and I really love being an operator, then you're a people leader, 80% of your time is people, right? I mean, you realize nothing gets done without maybe the most junior person on the team knowing exactly what their goals are, what they're trying to accomplish every single day. So it's people all day long. And you realize like the best that you can do, especially now that we've grown to, honestly, we're 1,000 people now, will be 1,500 by the end of the year, is the best thing you can do is lead with values, goals, and inspire people and demonstrate the behaviors that you hope that they have, right? And so much of that is making sure that they feel that they're working in a place where those things are clear, where they feel supported, where they feel appreciated and can do their best work. I think about it all the time because I don't think you can do your best work without that feeling. And certainly at Reddit, we've spent a lot of time over the last year making sure that we continue to make progress here, and we have. So I feel really good about that.
The platform itself, right, it's a matrix of information and activity and, navigating brand safety and all the things that you need to think about on a day-to-day basis. How are you monitoring the site itself for language and offense or lack thereof?
Yeah. For us, safety is really important, right? Trust is really what distinguishes the communities on Reddit and the overall community, what I call the community almost with the C, that is wrapped around all the communities on Reddit. And so we start with this layer of policy. which is, we have policies against harassment, bullying, hateful content, which we updated last year. And we use technology as well as humans to police that behavior. What's interesting about Reddit, because it's structurally everything has to go through communities, is that when you see a community developing, poor behavior, et cetera, you can remove that whole community, right? So when it clusters, you can remove that community. And that's very unique to Reddit. It's not something that you can do on other platforms because you don't have this structure of where every piece of content has to go through a community. Everything starts with community. Our communities and our users share the responsibility for safety. And this is what's really effective about Reddit, because if you think about dialogue, you think about, even the evolution with the LGBTQ community, the closest people to the needs of that community, how it's evolving, and even who might be attacking that community are actually people who experience that, right? Who are in the community. So the way that layer works is each community has rules and it has human moderators, and it has the ability to evaluate content based on their rules, their mores, and you can upvote or downvote something.
I love that. And I think about this idea, online personas, right? You spent time and Pop Sugar, and of course now Reddit. There's an online persona we find people and how they behave, and how we, even ourselves and how we behave online versus how they behave in real life. How have you experienced the psychology, I guess, online as it pertains to offenses?
And look, I have to say, it's sort of, there's been this myth, I think, that anonymity creates, fosters bad behavior. I think it's like the opposite based on everything I've seen at Reddit. In fact, I think that having your name actually creates, and this is true in real life, almost a performative nature, because you are very conscious that people are watching you. And so I'm not convinced that that's your true self. What you see on Reddit is that because people are able to be anonymous, they are sharing a part of themselves that they would never share anywhere else because they have that control and safety. If you're a teenager who's thinking about coming out or might be trans, you can access a community in an anonymous fashion that allows you to explore and learn in a very safe way. That's the same with, people who might be struggling with depression or are struggling with a sick family member or thinking about divorce or a new parent. Those are these milestones in your life that you personally go through that you're not going to show publicly attached to your name, but you need help with. And that's where communities on Reddit are, I think, extraordinarily powerful. There's also, beyond those sort of self-actualization points, there's just things that other platforms are not useful to me for, based on who I am. So for example, I became an avid gardener during the pandemic. I'm really into that in the gardening communities on Reddit, but it's my friends on other platforms, they don't need to hear about Zone 7 gardening issues.
In your own career, you had your reflection point of identity and oh wait, actually this is my superpower. Was there anyone who helped you along the way? And what was that moment of epiphany, I guess, and realizing that it was a superpower?
It was an evolution. I don't think it was, it's an evolution. What I'd say is, so stage one, I think early in my career, I was probably more intimidated and cautious and quiet and didn't share openly about my personal life. I had separation between personal and professional because I think I didn't feel safe as being a junior person. I went to business school, and that was the first time I think I met other gay professionals. And suddenly there were people who were out and not out. And that was interesting to hear about their life experience. And you could see the topography was okay, there, it was kind of inspiring to see, wow, that's what it looks like to have these things come together in a fulsome way in your life. And that seemed pretty amazing if that could happen for me. So that was sort of inspiring. And that, I think that started to motivate me. And when I started to go into operating and work in consumer media and tech, I realized that was possible for me. And that's when I brought my full self to the table as a leader and shared, came out and shared more about my life. And now the arc, where that arc is now is I've realized that as a leader doing that just makes me, I think, feel like more of a trusted person to my teams where other people are willing to share what's going on in their life, what makes them unique. And it's allowed, I think, people to develop and feel that sense of belonging at work that allows them to perform better. And so it's just turned into an asset. So that's kind of the evolution. And that took, for me, probably, over a decade, I'd say.
So in terms of other companies that might be exploring the same journey of increasing their diversity efforts around LGBTQ plus issues, what advice do you give them?
Yeah, I'll share a couple things about, how to, I think, foster the LGBTQ community within your company. I think one is I wouldn't treat it as a monolith. I think it's multiple communities within LGBTQ. There's a lot of diversity within the community. Number two, I would say there's a lot of energy behind allyship, which I think is awesome. It's great, but I still think that there's a need for LGBTQ spaces and spaces with allies. And so I would keep that in mind in terms of creating, enabling dialogues and spaces between the two. And then third, I'd say is, I think there's declared allyship, which is awesome. And then there's this level that I think really benefits the company, which is what I call cultural fluency. This is when you move from, yes, I support you, of course, like I know who you are and I value you and I support you, to I really understand you. Like I understand I really understand your life experience. I've taken the time to get this cultural fluency. And that is, I think, when your company becomes stronger, because your people leaders, when the more cultural fluency they have with LGBTQ, employees and community or any diverse community, it makes them a better leader because they understand at a more profound level the life experience, the words, everything about that community.
As diversity and inclusion efforts are present at most large corporations, it has been a long and tumultuous journey. Marty Chavez, who joined Goldman Sachs in the early 90s as an openly gay Latinx man, has seen it firsthand. The former chief financial officer at Goldman Sachs tells me about his experiences, the work he has done for the community, and his thoughts on what's next. Let's go back to the very beginning of you. There's an interesting story about your parents and their focus on education as a means of overcoming circumstance. Tell us a little bit about that sort of upbringing.
Well, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a city that was about 75% Hispanic, and yet Hispanics were the underclass. One of the family legends is my mom vowed she was either going to be a nun or she's going to have 10 children and send them all to Harvard. And she gives herself a 50% grade for having 5 children and sent them all to Harvard.
So not a nun.
Got halfway there.
So fast forward to your career, especially like representing a lot of different groups. Is there a pressure ever you feel in terms of being Latino, being queer? Like, is there a pressure you feel to represent the groups and advancement in the culture?
Actually, I gotta tell you, that's just not how my brain works. If I felt pressure at those intersections, I'm at an awful lot of intersections. I have some ink. I am sober. Some of those things might make me even rarer in my industry. As you can tell from just listening, I internalized a lot of lessons from my mother. And I remember once when I was a kid, my brother saying at the dinner table that he wanted to do something to help Hispanics, and that was a long time ago. This would have been in the 70s. And my mother quite sternly said, the best thing you can do for Hispanics is to be really successful yourself and set an example. And so if there's some pressure that I feel, it is to set a good example.
That's great. It's really great. And so in the industry that you've kind of spent most of your time in, especially most notably at Goldman Sachs, what did you see in terms of the gaps between equality and issues that needed to be addressed in the industry?
Well, so I was at Goldman Sachs a long time. I joined in '93, left for a few years, to do a couple things, including starting a company around the dot-com time, and then returned in 2005 and just retired in 2019. So as you would expect, there's a lot of change in that period of time. I came out in my job interview in 93, and I would say that was completely unexpected, to such an extent that maybe it had never happened before. And the gentleman who was hiring me, still there, was my boss for a long time. Really didn't know what to do. I said, I think I should tell you that I'm gay. And he said, well, do you have a boyfriend? Which I thought was a lovely answer. I don't know that one would say that these days, but he was thinking quickly, and he said, well, you've got a boyfriend, he's a securities lawyer, you should all come out to New York together, we'll find him a job at a law firm that we work with. And I thought, well, this is a gay-friendly place in an industry that I had heard, I was in Silicon Valley at the time, in an industry that I had heard was quite homophobic. And I thought, okay, this is going to be fine. I think rather than having concluded that it was a gay-friendly place, it might have been more accurate to say that Goldman Sachs in those days didn't care if I was gay or straight, as long as I was really good at math and software.
Coming out in an interview is an amazing story, and then you fast forward to 2021, where there's a great awakening when it comes to equality in the workplace. What have you seen change or shift over that time? What's different than when you started and now?
I noticed a huge change on Wall Street as it relates to LGBT inclusion. Really two things that started happening at some scale, maybe 10, 15 years ago, which is Wall Street made the commercial connection, the commercial argument for diversity. Just as we all know that portfolio diversification is the only free lunch in finance, well, diversifying the people on your team is another free lunch. You get uncorrelated views, and those are valuable. And so making that commercial argument, it's altruism, yes, it's the right thing to do, but there's also commercial thing here. And then also connecting it to the allies. That was huge for LGBT inclusion. A lot of other people who are LGBT on Wall Street will say, this is what happens, right? Somebody comes out somewhere in a firm of 40,000 people, and some well-meaning person would say, oh, you got to get on Marty's calendar, right? Which is great. But then there were starting to be hundreds and later more than 1,000 people, and Marty's calendar had a hard time with that. And you can't put the burden of diversity, equity, and inclusion on the tiny number of diverse people, women, Black, Hispanic, LGBT, that you've got. It's got to be something that everybody contributes to. So I see these changes as much more continuous, and none of it is any substitute for actually doing the work.
You led a group at Goldman Sachs focused on LGBTQ issues and building a community there. What advice did you find yourself giving, or do you find yourself giving now to younger executives who are, maybe hesitating on celebrating themselves in the workplace? So
I'll give a couple of pieces of advice, which really I just picked up from a pillar of LGBT rights, which is come out wherever you are. When you come out, it's news that you came out. It is not news that you're gay. And when you're in the trenches with colleagues, having that authenticity is something that's really valuable. And while you're very busy worried about the bad things that might happen to you, were you to come out, what you are completely missing is all the wonderful things that can only happen because you're bringing all of yourself to work.
Marty Chavez, thank you for joining the Work in Progress.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
That superpower element, look, when you check a lot of different boxes, in Jen's case, being Asian, being woman, being gay, you automatically are building up a muscle of resilience and fortitude. And I think that's what it takes. Same thing in Marty's case, being Latin and gay and on Wall Street of all things. You've already sort of built up this coat of armor and an ability to kind of block all the necessary comments and opposition that might come your way. It's not easy, as they both stated, but it is kind of rooted in their DNA and who they are. Probably one of the other big takeaways is bringing your entire self to your workplace. You know, the things that you care about, the things that you're passionate about, finding your community, being a self-starter in many ways, or at least finding the self-starters and joining their efforts. As you see more and more communities develop at different corporations, you know, you start to see the change happen, right? People start to feel comfortable inside their environments, and with comfort comes better ideas and ingenuity and all the things that we seek our organizations to do for the world.